Hi, there's the quick response to your video, Corey, on antinatalism, which is a response to my video on antinatalism is a dangerous idea. I'll try and get through this quick, I've just got some notes. I mean, obviously my video wasn't really about antinatalism per se, it was about the idea of dangerous ideas and how the antinatalist discussion, at least as it's taking place on YouTube, seems to have all the characteristics of that, which is that it's provoking kinds of responses which are heated, which are off topic, or which are dismissive. You know, it has all the features of a lot of the other dangerous ideas. So I just thought that was interesting. So I'm not really allying myself to either side, even if it didn't make any sense to take sides. In fact, I did make a video specifying that it didn't make a lot of sense to make sides. I said that antinatalism was one of a series of strategies towards reducing harm to zero, and yeah, so I'm really about that. I am looking for a refutation of antinatalism in its own terms. I was quite specifically asking for refutations to David Benatar's stuff, which is I don't know an awful lot about it, but I'm guessing that seems to be the key text that people are citing. And it's those two claims he makes in the book. One is about the asymmetry in pleasure and play, and suffering and flourishing, an asymmetry which, in his terms, can only be meaningfully resolved by going for the better not to have been thing. I haven't seen a technical refutation of that. And the other thing, which I think there probably is a better refutation for, which is that life isn't, I don't know exactly how he phrases it, but it's the idea that life isn't as good as it feels. I don't really understand it, to be honest. But it's something he says there. He cites various. I haven't read the book, but I've read about the book and I've heard interviews by him. He cites various studies which indicate that when we self-report about what the quality of our life is, in summation, we tend to overestimate wildly how good a time we've had. So I'm really interested in technical refutations of those, not alternative philosophies or different viewpoints, which I think a lot of the responses have been, which, you know, they're interesting in their own terms, but they're not really what I was after. Alright, I've just made some notes here. I don't know how well I'll be able to understand my own notes. The rights of future generations. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the rights of future generations, the rights to clean air, clean water, those kind of things. If we do that, then we have to acknowledge the concept of futures, like there's a futures market in share prices and so on, commodities market. If we're saying that, if we're acknowledging that future generations, that it's meaningful to talk about future generations in terms of rights, then we can't simultaneously turn around and argue against antinatalism, because it uses the fiction of a future generation, and say that we can't talk about potential impositions or conferments on those generations. So I think we just have to be consistent. We can't simultaneously criticise antinatalism because it assigns qualities to the unborn, whilst ourselves assigning rights to the unborn. So that's just that, really. You mentioned take ourselves out. I can't remember the context in which you said this, I'm really sorry, but and about taking ourselves out as a way of reducing human populations and human reproductivity. Typically, taking ourselves out doesn't reduce populations, and doesn't reduce reduce populations, kind of, but it tends not to reduce reproduction, does it? Taking ourselves out in the ways that you suggested, letting nature take us out, is usually through disaster or disease. It's only recently it's become possible for us to rely on decay to take us out. Historically, and for all of the animal kingdom and most of the human population, it's disaster and disease which takes people out, and it typically takes people out, and to reduce population we need to take people out before reproductive age. So what we're really talking about there is massive infant mortality. I mean, that's a really unpleasant thing to think about, but that's what you're saying there, really. And if you're saying that we can kind of look to nature to take ourselves out and sort out reproduction, what you're arguing therefore is effectively infant mortality rates, which I think by any measure would constitute suffering, both for the infant and for the parents and for anybody around it. That's how nature thins out populations. It says something about the persons who are not conceived are not persons at all. Well, that's often said when in relation to the antinatalist stuff, but we can't simultaneously say that and, as I said before, then argue for the rights of future generations. Either we're acknowledging the fiction of the unborn, and I say fiction in a meaningful sense. Either we're acknowledging the status of that fiction as a method of devising rights and privileges and responsibilities and so on, or we're not, and we can't have one without the other. Rights begin at conception. I know you weren't arguing this, obviously some people would think they would, but rights in terms of legal rights begin, I think it's about week 23 in the UK of pregnancy. Up to that point the embryo is part of the woman's body, and then at an artificially demarcated point in week 23 the embryo acquires rights, legal rights, and nobody can tinker with it. You wouldn't say you impose those rights, you would say you confer those rights, but nevertheless there is an awarding or a conferment or an imposing of something going on there. And of course because rights are positives, we don't have a problem with that. But if you are talking about rights, responsibilities, duties, burdens, challenges, pleasures, pains, if you take the whole kit and caboodle all together, which I think we would have to if we are acknowledging that fiction, then it is a significant act. It isn't an insignificant one. It isn't one we can just sidestep and say no, it's not interesting. I've made a note about impose, but I made a separate video about impose because I've been thinking about that as a separate category of conception recently, so I won't go into impose right now. No place to stand. Was the biological... I think you're talking about yourself. Was the biological capacity to procreate imposed upon me? Or conferred? Was it doesn't really, in a sense, it doesn't really matter whether that's an imposition or whether it's a gift, whether it's a curse or a blessing. Yeah, of course, these things were imposed or cursed or gifted upon all of us, and not just the biological capacity to reproduce, but everything that goes with it. The biological capacity to be attracted to a member of the opposite sex or a member of the same sex. The biological necessity that informs everything that we do and all the things we wear, and the thousands of years of history that have produced you and the people around us, doing these rather odd kind of preening in front of the camera things that we do, which are undoubtedly informed, at least in significant part, by an urge to procreate somewhere, within all, interlaced within all that. So it's not just the between 2 and 40 minutes that we spend twice a week indulging in that urge to procreate. It's all the rest of the dressing up around it, isn't it, really, which informs much of culture. So yeah, all that stuff was kind of imposed or gifted upon us, for sure. And through the processes of sexual selection is continuing to do so. Trying to end it all is just as much an imposition. Yeah, I mean, this is suicide. We're not talking about suicide. David Benatar is very, and again, I'm just talking about an interview, he's very, very clear on that. He sounds like a very happy guy. He's a head of philosophy at Cape Town University, so he's not without credentials. And he's very clear that that we should enjoy ourselves. And he said we should enjoy ourselves as much as you can. We might as well. We've got the capacity to enjoy ourselves. Don't. I mean, if you want to commit suicide, fine. It's within your gift to do that. But why? You can enjoy yourself. If you can, do it. If you can enjoy yourself, do. He says, and he seems cheerful about all that. So really, suicide, and certainly not genocide, is not a discussion. It's not, as I understand it at least, not part of an anti-natalist discussion. Personally, we're not conceived to have no... I don't know what I was talking about there. The person gets to decide for themselves whether life is an imposition. Well, kind of, yeah, but that's like kind of deciding whether you're like falling after you've already been thrown out of the plane, isn't it? Really, you can't. You can't I can't think of a better way to put that, really. The person gets to decide for themselves whether life is an imposition. I kind of addressed that in the other video about imposing. Because in a sense, the three parts of that sentence, that's a quotation from you, the person gets to decide for themselves whether life is an imposition. Three parts to that sentence: the person, self, as in themselves, and life. I mean, they're all kind of almost interchangeable terms, aren't they? The person gets to decide for their own person whether being a person is an imposition. It's it's a confusion brought about by the metaphors that are derived from the concept of imposition, I think. But yeah, it's just problematic, that. But as I say, asking our children to decide whether they want to be alive or not when they're already alive is a bit much to ask, really. Yeah, at the aeroplane you go now. Do you like falling or not? Yeah, I think I've pretty much finished. So basically, just to return, I mean, the refutation I was actually asking for in that, or was interested to find, because I haven't found any, was the basic asymmetry that Benatar talks about, and to a lesser extent this other thing about, we're not really as, although even for those of us like myself who appear to be having a reasonably good life, we're kind of fooling ourselves. I'm less convinced by that, but I'm looking for refutations of the other particularly. And then you say the greatest imposition is to decide for another person whether life is worth living. That's your quotation. The greatest imposition is to decide for another person whether life is worth living. And I think that's right. I mean, that's the point that the anti-natalists make, which I think you're kind of echoing here. Because because every time we have children, don't we? And I've done it 3 times now. Every time we do that, we decide that life is going to be worth living for that person. It might be, I don't know. But that's the thing, isn't it? We decide that. We throw them out the aeroplane. We decide that falling is worth doing. We decide that parachuting is a great hobby, and we throw them out of the aeroplane. The greatest imposition is to decide for another person whether life is worth living. Yes, so that's that really. Anyway, thanks very much. Bye.